Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They get it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. Oh, the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Well, legacies are on the line in Happy Valley this weekend as Ohio State heads in to play Penn State. We wonder who has more to lose in this game, Ryan Day or James Franklin. We will break down our game of the week in full detail. The ACC Contender Show goes south to Dallas as Pitt and SMU, undefeated in conference play, square off on Saturday night. And Oregon, is there any chance that heading into Ann Arbor is a landmine game for the Ducks? We'll break down the top team in the country and their case to beat the Wolverines. That and much more right here on the Three Technique, a college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes, along with Trey Reeves tonight. I'm Mitch Mason. Glad to have you with us. Trey, week 10, so much good football has been played. This slate a little bit sleepier, and I think a lot of that is due in part to some teams being on byes, some teams playing conference games at one end of the conference spectrum. It seems like a lot of the top of the table are playing the bottom of the table, but overall, I think we still have plenty of storylines to look at here in week 10 and a lot to play for as far as the playoff goes.
Absolutely. There's a lot of playoff contenders still in action. There's a lot of teams that could play their way into the playoffs this week. There's a lot of teams that could play their way out of the playoffs this week. So it's a typical November Saturday. There's a lot on the line, even if some of the top teams are taking the week off.
Yeah, and of course, there is just so many more contenders this year. You have the expanded playoff. I heard SiriusXM, Chris Budden was getting a little fiery on that, talking to anti-expansion folks, saying at this point in the season, how can you still be against this 12-team playoff? The
Did you hear
storyline.
Big Cat last week clowning Ari Wasserman too? That's worth going back and listening on their show last week. He was absolutely just eviscerating Ari Wasserman, and showing how every single one of his takes has been proven wrong so far.
I just, listen, if you had that take in the preseason, fine, reserve your judgment. But by now, the fact that we have so many amazing threads to follow on a week like this, where yes, there are some fantastic games at the top of the run sheet, but the expanded playoff and the conference races make you pay attention all the way through Saturday. There are meaningful football games being played in every single time window. I just, for the life of me, can't imagine why there are people that are still complaining about that. But we're not going to give them any more credence on this show. What we are going to give credence to, though, Trey, is the good brand homefieldapparel.com. You can use our code 3TechPod for 15% off your entire first order, or you can shop through the link in our link tree. You can find that in our social media at 3TechPod. Would also invite the new listeners, the new subscribers to the podcast, head on over to the YouTube side. You can watch the show. You can get our show in clip-sized bites. And if you're just flat out new, if you found us on social media throughout the weeks, we'd love to have you be a part of the Jimmies and the Joes. Hit follow, hit subscribe, leave a rating when possible, and help us continue to grow this show. Trey, let's head to Happy Valley to start tonight's episode. We've got the number 3 Ohio State Buckeyes, 3.5-point favorites on the road against the 4th-ranked Penn State Nittany Lions. This is a game that we've waited all season for. It is crucially an 11 a.m. kick on Fox because the TV execs just refused to let us have nice things. I don't believe this is even, officially a whiteout. I haven't necessarily seen calls for whiteout-like conditions. I'm hoping we get that. But under the noon sky there in Pennsylvania, not quite as intimidating as if Ohio State was walking into the middle of Happy Valley at night. This feels like a legacy game for both Ryan Day and James Franklin. And no matter which side of the fence you sit on, no matter which side of this coaching debate you find yourself on, there's no doubt that there's a lot of pressure on both of these guys to get it done. For James Franklin, it's his coaching record against Ohio State that stands out. He's 1-9 against the Buckeyes in his tenure. He has a proclivity to lose these big games to Ohio State, to Michigan. Can he get over that hurdle this weekend? On the other hand, Ryan Day, he kind of only loses to Michigan, right? He lost to Oregon, and that was his 4th ever Big Ten conference loss. But this is a game that feels very losable for Ohio State, given the fact that the Buckeyes really aren't clicking on all cylinders. When you look at this game, do you find yourself more gravitating towards what happens if Ryan Day loses or what happens if James Franklin can't get it done?
It's funny because we all on our show entered the season thinking that this was kind of a, if not now, win season for Ohio State with regards to winning the Big Ten, winning the national championship, getting over that Michigan hump. You got the talent. Much has been made about the $20 million roster, right? If not this season, win. This week, and I know I'm totally overreacting to the Nebraska game, so let me just get that out of the way. This week, it almost feels like the narrative has shifted to James Franklin, if not now, win. It feels like Ohio State's vulnerable. You've got the offensive line issues. You've got the run game that's really struggled, especially in clutch spots. It feels like the narrative has shifted to, if not now, win for James Franklin. And I'm starting to get bought up into that hype a little bit. Now, there's a very real chance that we have just completely overreacted to Ohio State playing a close game. They've been known to play a close game or two over the Big Ten schedule in the past and then come right back and be their normal selves. And that was a good, well-coached team in Nebraska, regardless of getting blown out by Indiana the week before. But there's a lot of cracks in the armor for Ohio State seemingly this year. I mentioned the offensive line. Here's the key stat for me. Ohio State is averaging just 2.16 yards per carry on third down this year. That's good enough to be 106th best in the country.
Yikes.
When you got to be able to run when the other team knows that you're going to run, and you got to protect your passer on third down. So that incorporates both of those things, actually running the football and avoiding taking a sack on third down. With Penn State's defensive line going up against a beat-up and battered Ohio State offensive line, I think that's a really scary proposition for the Buckeyes going into Happy Valley. So I'm going to take Penn State in the points. It's a 3.5-point spread.
Mm-hmm.
I like the getting multiple outcomes here. I don't really see a world where Ohio State runs away with this one. Got to see Penn State's offense get an extra gear before and know what the quarterback situation is before I pick them outright. But definitely comfortable taking 3.5 here.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a couple of interesting things there. I think I agree with you on the spread here. It feels like this is a 3-point win one way or the other. You mentioned the pressure on James Franklin. I'll flip the script and I'll say the pressure really feels like it's on Ryan Day, because the narrative that he's been born on third base, that he's been given every resource, everything he's asked for, all this talent, and he still cannot win the big one, that he can't win a national championship, that has all been put under a microscope given the amount of money that they just spent in the transfer portal this offseason, right? I mean, $20 million plus purchases to bring guys back, to bring guys into the roster, Caleb Downs, Quinshon Judkins, Will Howard. And yet this Ohio State team continues to look very flawed at times. And you mentioned the Nebraska game, a one-score win. That game very much in doubt, even down to the last drive before Raiola threw that game-sealing interception. Ohio State has holes along the offensive line. They've got a couple of injuries, namely at left tackle, and that got exposed by the Cornhuskers defense, who, I remind you, gave up all the points to Indiana the week before, and then suddenly Ohio State just could not stop them from getting to Will Howard. We talked about Chip Kelly having to scheme around that. It's even more exacerbated by the fact that they can't run the ball right now. Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins have just been ineffective as far as making a true impact, a statement on the game. And now they're lining up against a Penn State defense that's 8th in rushing defense. That they will give up some chunk plays at times. At their worst against USC, they were giving up 11 yards per carry. So they certainly can't allow the Buckeyes to do that. But they've also got, Penn State does, a top 20 passing defense. And so Will Howard is not going to be able to be one-dimensional in this game. They're not going to beat Penn State, I don't think, by simply throwing the ball down the field. They're going to have to be balanced. If Ryan Day, with all of his treasure trove of skill talent, those Ferraris and Maseratis that he's got in the wide receiver room. If they can't figure out how to win a big game like this on the road, I don't know that the calls for his job ever will be fully vindicated and fully justified. But boy, they start to get a whole lot louder if he's not able to win this game against Penn State, against James Franklin, who you've had his number for these first several years that you've been at in Crimson, right? I'm nervous for Ohio State. I feel like there's much more pressure on the Buckeyes team as a whole than there is Penn State. It feels like if Penn State loses this game, maybe it's due to the backup quarterback. Bo Pribula came in and gave Nebraska a spark last week, or Penn State a spark last week against Wisconsin, no doubt. But the defense also helped with that, right? The pick six from Jalen Reed helps them get off the mat. I just wonder if there are maybe some more built-in excuses for Penn State this week than Ohio State, even given the injuries.
Well, the built-in excuses, this is what James Franklin does, right? Because if we're betting on Penn State, you laid it out at the beginning of this segment, you're betting on the guy that's 1-9 against the team that's going to be across the sideline from him next week. So it's a tough bet. It's a tough sell, honestly. And there's a lot to be said about just the consistency that Ohio State's had. So, but when you're talking about the level and just, it was a true national championship or bust year. And if they lose this game, there's a very real chance they're missing the college football playoff. Those are the stakes this week for me. There's going to be a real quality win issue for Ohio State, and they still have to play an undefeated Indiana and a Michigan team that, while they're down this year, has already beat them 3 times in a row, and Ryan Day has really struggled with. So they are really going to be on the ropes if they lose this one, and the calls are going to start to be justified. We've all laughed at Ohio State for being spoiled the last couple of years, but the calls are going to start to be justified if they can't get it done this week. And if they eventually go on to miss the playoff because of it, that would just be absolutely inexcusable. I want to give you a keystone stat because I think this is what's going to decide the game this week. Third downs. Cliche. I get it. But something's got to give here. Penn State is 10th in the country at converting first downs overall. Ohio State is first in the country at surrendering first downs. Penn State's tied for 7th in third down conversions, and Ohio State's 20th in third down defense. So can Penn State stay on the field, keep that offense of Ohio State off the field, and control the game that way? That's what's going to be deciding this game. For Penn State, we build up this case that Ohio State might be mortal. If Penn State is able to win this game, they're 4th in the country right now. They move into the driver's seat right next to Oregon to meet in the Big Ten championship game. But what would this do to Penn State's legacy, their playoff case, their national perception heading into, their first chance to really make a college football playoff and go on a postseason run? I don't think you could say enough about what it would do to the perception of where they're at. It would seem like they had climbed a mountain and figured gotten a big monkey off their back, right? Because we've mentioned it several times already. This is where they've always run into. They've been a solid 9-3, 10-2 program under James Franklin, but not getting over the hump. This would signify that they're over the hump and ready to contend, not just for a Big Ten title, but for a national title. Because if you can beat a team as flawed as they are right now, seemingly, if you can beat a team as talented as Ohio State, you can theoretically beat anybody else that's going to line up against you this year all the way to the national championship game. And their schedule after Ohio State is manageable, is putting it lightly, Mitch. It's Washington at home, at Purdue, at Minnesota, and then Maryland at home to close it out before they would then theoretically meet Oregon or Indiana in the Big Ten championship game. So the sky's the limit if they can get past this one. This is the big hurdle that they haven't been able to get over. And the national conversation about Penn State would shift overnight.
A couple of things that I'm watching for Penn State quickly. Even though they have a great defensive line, they've been really good at stopping the run. Their pass rush has actually struggled a little bit this year. They have a low sack and pressure rating. Tackle for loss numbers are not impressive. I wonder if we see those elevate against a banged-up Ohio State offensive line. Again, make Will Howard make quicker decisions, get the ball out. The other thing that Penn State has not done particularly well this season is the explosive play, whether it be passing or rushing. They're one of the worst teams in the country and explosive plays over the course of a game. If they're able to hit those, though, and change that narrative, boy, the crowd's going to be rowdy. And I feel like this could go Penn State's way in a hurry. Again, we don't know who's going to start at quarterback. Drew Aller is looking maybe better. I think James Franklin mentioned that in his press conference, that he's trending towards being able to play after suffering a knee injury against Wisconsin. But, we'll wait for that definitive word to see who lines up under center for Penn State. Let's go down to the Hilltop, where number 18 Pitt, undefeated Pitt, takes on number 20 SMU. The Ponies are 7.5-point favorites. This is a 7 p.m. kick on ACC Network, which, man, it really stinks that
we
this is
get the biggest game of the year potentially in the Big Ten at 11 a.m. Central Time, and we get Pitt and SMU on the ACC Network. Like, what are we doing, guys?
I know. There's some really head-scratching TV decisions as far as channels go. But I mentioned both teams undefeated in ACC play. Pitt's undefeated overall. And the winner here officially stamps their case as no longer a dark horse to be in the running to make it to Charlotte, but perhaps a legitimate contender. And I don't want to say favorite necessarily, with Clemson and Miami still undefeated and they don't play each other. But Pitt will have to play Clemson. So at that point, maybe you would get a favorite, but it sets the stage for some late season drama in the ACC. 7.5. It feels like a large point spread considering two things. One, Pitt just turned Syracuse over. They had 5 interceptions against the Orange last week. And SMU, in a winning effort, did turn the ball over 6 times. I feel like Pitt's defense will be able to travel. We've seen that happen this season so far. That spread feels a little high to me.
I'm with you. And I think that Pitt is a team that, not just the Vegas spreads, but some of the algorithms like the stat nerds that we love so much might be a little bit behind on, because a lot of them are ranking them lower on their power rankings, lower in the like the SP Plus doesn't really love Pitt. A lot of the other ones don't either. I think they're just a little bit behind. Pitt's had some wonky wins. I'm thinking, you mentioned the Syracuse win last week. Their offense, if you just look at the stats, it looked putrid, but they didn't need to because they got 3 free touchdowns defensively. Also thinking about the Cincinnati game early on in the season where they had to come back furiously late. They've had some wonky wins, and I think that's hurting them in some of these algorithms, but they're 6-1 against the spread this year. So I'll roll with Pitt on the road to cover the spread. I think SMU can win this game outright. It's going to be really interesting, though, if Jennings can play. If Jennings, he's questionable right now. Once he took over this offense, it was just a completely different gear for SMU. And Pitt's defensive line, they're top 20 in the country in sacks. So if Jennings can't go and it's Preston Stone back there, that's going to be really something to watch, because they really struggled to protect Preston Stone early on in the year. And the mobility of Jennings really helped out that offensive line, gave them time to gel and get to where they are today.
Yeah, I think when we went to BYU to watch that game earlier in the season, the only game that SMU's lost to this point, I think Preston Stone was sacked on 3 of his 5 dropbacks, if I'm not mistaken. And
it wasn't like his fault either. It was like that. They're in the backfield and he's on the ground.
Yeah, lost 26 yards on 5 dropbacks, which was insane. The offensive line has gone through ups and downs, there's no doubt. And one of the big reasons that Kevin Jennings was anointed the starting quarterback, very similarly, it feels like, to maybe Marcel Reed in College Station, is he can just move. He can evade the pressure and keep his eyes down the field. And so far, it's worked for SMU. Now, the luck almost ran out last week when they were turning the ball over like it was going out of style. But if Kevin Jennings is healthy, I think that gives the Ponies their best chance to win. Eli Holstein has also been banged up. There was a question of whether or not he would start in this game. Pat Narduzzi has said that he'll be fine. He's ready to go, but I think it is something that's worth monitoring going forward. For me, I think you have to basically lay this win at the feet of which defense stops the run more effectively. Both of these teams are in the top 10 in stopping the defense so far. Rashard Smith has carried the load for SMU. It's been Des Reed doing everything for Pitt, both in the running game and catching a lot of passes out of the backfield as well. So we know the Ponies have a great defense. They're at home. I do tend to lean with you here. I think SMU gets the job done, but I like this to be a much closer game than the 7.5 point spread that Vegas is indicating right now. The leaning, I think, if you are taking SMU to cover, is the Ponies are much better at explosive plays than Pitt does. Pitt doesn't really have that game-breaking ability to hurt you down the field, whereas SMU, I feel like, has a little bit more to that game. They go east-west a lot, but you give Kevin Jennings the right time, and he can throw the ball deep down the field as well. I feel like SMU's offense to this point has a little bit more giddy up and go than Pitt's does. So if you're taking SMU, I think that's what you're banking on. If you're taking SMU for a different reason, definitely let us know in the comments at 3Tech Pod on YouTube. Let us know why you're placing that bet.
I think my favorite bet in this game, though, might be the under, actually. It's
I
60.5 right now.
Yeah.
And these two offenses are great. Don't get me wrong, but the defenses are really underrated. And I think they're going to have some good days, especially if you have one or more backup quarterbacks seeing time in this game. Preston Stone's not your typical backup. I get that. But yeah, I like the under a lot in this game. I was surprised that it was so high.
I think, especially given the fact that both teams want to run the ball, if they're not turning it over, which, I mean, listen, both teams have shown a little bit of a proclivity to do that. Holstein was turning it over a ton against Cal a couple of weeks ago. SMU, obviously, half a dozen times at Duke. But both of these teams want to run the football. SMU's averaging over 200 yards per game. Pitt is a little bit more middle of the pack with 160. So I'm with you there as well. We agree on the first two games, all of our bets so far, which I don't know. Maybe that's concerning. Maybe that's a good thing. We'll see. Final game in our big three is number 1, Oregon on the road against Michigan. The Ducks are the top team in the country. They're 14.5-point favorites. 2:30 p.m. on CBS. And the question for this game, Trey, to set it up, what does Michigan have to do to actually make this some sort of a trap game for the Ducks? I read a couple of previews on this game in preparation, and literally all of them were like, yeah, take the Ducks. There's really not a case for Michigan here. Is it that simple?
I think on paper, yes, but I'm going to take Michigan plus 14.5. And I'm going to totally preface this by saying that it's a vibes pick. I feel like we're due for something seismic in college football. Why not have it be in Ann Arbor, right? And also, I mean, Michigan looked a little bit more coherent offensively. It wasn't great. They weren't running the ball all over the field or chucking it down the field or anything like that. It just looked a little bit more coherent against Michigan State last week. So that's a positive in their favor. I think the path to a cover here for Michigan involves turning Dylan Gabriel over. This is still a really talented defense. This is still a defense that has gotten no help whatsoever from their offense this year and still looked decent more often than not. Not the elite unit that we saw the last couple of years when they were making runs to the playoffs, but solidly above average to borderline really good for this Michigan defense. It's the best combination of defense and road environment that Oregon has seen so far. I think that's fair to say. I don't know if it's the best defense. It's certainly the best road environment. That could be tricky, and Dylan Gabriel has shown a propensity to throw some really weird interceptions at times. And it hasn't hurt him against lower level competition, but against a team like Michigan, if you give them short fields, that's how they're going to stay into this game. So I think, I'm not saying the moment's going to be too big for Oregon, but this is a really interesting combination here of solid defense, big, rowdy crowd. Give me Michigan to cover at home, look just good enough to give Michigan fans hope that they can do something crazy, and then have their offense do something stupid at the end to rip their hearts out.
All right, so we won't pitch the immaculate inning here on Pitt. So I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to take Oregon minus the points.
I think that's the wiser pick.
I think if this game is played, say week 3 or week 4, whenever USC played Michigan, and Michigan's pass rush disrupted what USC wanted to do, throwing the ball down the field, right? I mean, Miller Moss looked frazzled, running for his life, threw a couple of bad interceptions in that game. I think that's the key to success for Michigan, and their pass rush has done fine this year. I think they can absolutely pressure Oregon, but the holes in the issues with the Ducks offensive line, I think they've fixed those for the large majority of these last couple of weeks. They shuffled a couple of pieces around after their slow starts offensively at home. And since then, the offensive line has done much better. What you've also seen is Oregon work that ball deeper down the field. It feels like Dylan Gabriel has gained confidence. He's working on the chemistry with the wide receivers. And now Oregon has gone to that more vertical passing attack, I think, that we expected coming in. Gabriel's gone from preseason favorite to win the Heisman to basically off the board to back up towards, 1 to 3, depending on which odds you're looking at. And this isn't the same Michigan secondary that we're used to. They're 85th in the country in pass defense right now. Oregon's got the 10th ranked passing attack. And again, that really hasn't started clicking until these last few weeks. I think if Gabriel had been putting up those numbers all season long, this might be a top 5 passing unit, if not the top unit in the country. The other thing that really worries me is that Michigan does turn the football over themselves. Their defense is forced some, but the offense gives it right back even faster than they can force those turnovers. Oregon's +3 in the turnover margin. Michigan is -6. So even though the Wolverines have the 15th best rushing defense, pass defense issues combined with the fact that that offense is good for a couple of turnovers as well, I just lean the Ducks. I feel like the Ducks have gotten better each week, that they are really ascending to the throne that is up for taking this season. I mean, since Georgia lost to Alabama, it really hasn't felt like anybody has firmly grasped that crown at the end of all of this. I think Oregon might be the team that's closest to doing that. So if the seat is empty, maybe the Ducks, stomp on Michigan this week. I'll take a minus the 14.5. Those are our 3 Tech Big 3. Let us know if you agree, disagree, where you would have your bets placed. You can do that again, like I said, at 3TechPod social media and in the comments on YouTube as well. Trey, let's move into storylines on a Saturday. Let's start in the SEC, and these storylines are brought to you by Baller Pickleball. Use code 3TechPod for 10% off your entire first order with Baller Pickleball. Hey, weather's getting nicer. Maybe you're able to get outside in the south here. A little windy down here in Texas. Maybe today was a terrible day to go play pickleball, but maybe you
find an indoor court. Find an indoor court.
Exactly. There you go. Let's start in the SEC. There are a couple of juicy games here, including one that has had at least a lot of folks nationally going the way that, frankly, I don't see this game going. It's in Columbia, South Carolina. Number 10 Texas A&M on the road against South Carolina, 6:30 p.m. on ABC. Aggies are ranked 10th. They're 2.5-point favorites going into a very difficult place to play in Williams-Brice Stadium. South Carolina does one thing, and they do it really well, and that's get to the quarterback. That is disrupt your play in the backfield. The problem is, Trey, I don't really think this team does anything else at a difference-making level. Their rushing attack is very solid, but I think Texas A&M is equipped to stop that rushing game. We even went so far as to look at what Rocket Sanders had done against the Aggies in his years at Arkansas. It's really not all that impressive. I'll turn it to you. Like, if South Carolina is going to win this game, what is the key to the success for the Gamecocks?
You have to hope that they found an extra gear offensively during the bye week, and that's certainly possible. Things can be developed and things can be found out during the bye week that other teams just aren't ready for, and that is certainly a possibility. A&M coming down from a big emotional win at home. The quarterback thing on the A&M side is certainly something to watch, like who's going to start at quarterback, how long of a leash will they have. It's a lot of things that could go wrong, and they're also traveling a time zone away across the country to play South Carolina, right? If A&M is the team that we as A&M fans hope that they are, they should win this one and cover the spread. The spread's at 2.5 right now. They should win this game and cover the spread. But there's enough talent on the South Carolina roster. I look at these two teams, and I feel like they want to do similar things. They're both really good at running the football. And if A&M plays Marcel Reed, it's a run-first quarterback. I think I lean Marcel Reed's arm over Lenore Seller's arm just ever so slightly at this point in their careers. But it's a run-first teams that also stop the run really well. So I understand why everybody thinks this is going to be a really close game. I understand why the Vegas line is so low. I just think that A&M has a few more difference makers or potential difference makers offensively. And I think their offensive line is going to be more up to the task than South Carolina's offensive line at stopping an elite unit, or at least hoping to contain it across the way when they're on offense. Because South Carolina's offensive line has not put up much of a fight against legitimately good defensive lines that they've played. So leaning A&M, think they have a few more difference makers and can just stop the bleeding of the other team's defensive line a little bit more to maybe bust off some runs that make a difference.
Yeah, I think for me, I look at two games when I pick this. And again, we are Texas A&M fans, so take that for a grain of salt if you'd like and fade our picks. I'm going to go with the Aggies minus the 2.5 as well. I look at two games. Number one, for Texas A&M, this smells a whole lot like Arkansas to me, right? Where Arkansas wants to stop the run. They don't have a great passing game either. They're going to want to pound the rock between the tackles. And while that was a low-scoring, ugly affair, Texas A&M found a way to get it done. Their defense turned Arkansas over a couple of times late. Marcel Reed did just enough. And finally, that running game for the Aggies broke through. After being bottled up for the entire first half, you saw the ground and pound approach continue to wear the Hogs' front four down. I think that's absolutely the key to success for Texas A&M this week. On the other hand, this game feels like maybe Ole Miss light, where South Carolina's offense was held to 3 points at home against Ole Miss, who has the top-ranked rush defense in the country. It is statistically better than Texas A&M's, but it's the same style that the Aggies are going to bring. The other thing that I think about is who's got the coaching edge in this. I know South Carolina is going to have a great home atmosphere. Williams-Brice at night, certainly not an atmosphere you can take lightly. But I'm so out on Shane Beamer as a winning football coach when the chips are down. And clearly Mike Elko has some ingredients, something going for him where he is winning everywhere he goes. Texas A&M could absolutely lose this game. Don't hear what I'm not saying to use your line, Trey. I'm not saying that South Carolina is not equipped to win this. They absolutely are. I think the recipe for success for South Carolina is taking advantage of inexperience at quarterback, if it is Marcel Reed, and maybe if it's Connor that goes out there, flustering a quarterback that's shown that when the pressure gets to him, he stops looking down the field. He stops knowing where to go with the football. I do think it's going to be Marcel Reed, though, and as long as the Aggies take care of the football, like you said, I think they've got a few more pieces in place to be able to win on the road. The other thing that they've got to get cleaned up, though, is the penalties. Man, if they make a bunch of stupid mistakes with personal fouls and offsides and false starts, that crowd is going to be going bananas. That's certainly a scenario where South Carolina can pull this upset.
Yeah, the procedural penalties have been an issue for A&M in the past, and after the play stuff, definitely willing to forgive some stuff in a big emotional game, right? But Mitch, what you're not mentioning is this is a massive rivalry. This is the battle for the freaking Bonham Trophy, man. Like arguably the most sought after piece of hardware in all of college football.
Yeah, no doubt. no doubt. Bigger than any other rivalry in the sport, quite honestly.
We hate them. They hate us. It's what college football is all about.
For those listeners who are not SEC fans and they're totally lost right now, just look it up on Twitter. I'm sure you'll
brief it. In 2014, they forced A&M and South Carolina to start playing each other every year, and then the fan bases just said, "Well, if we got to play each other, we're gonna act like we hate each other." And it's kind of just sprung from there. The
Twitter war every year when A&M and South Carolina plays hysterical. And from the outside looking in, you might think that we actually hate each other. We don't. It's a football game we play every year. Let's go elsewhere in the SEC. We got number 2 Georgia at Florida, world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Did you see they're moving to this game to Atlanta coming up?
I did, yeah. Atlanta and Tampa, I believe. Jacksonville Stadium is going to be under renovation for a couple of years. I don't know what that means for the Jags. I guess they're doing something else.
They're in London that week, I'm sure.
Yeah, I guess. Like, I don't know what Jacksonville is going to do for 2 years if they can't play this singular game there. But, yeah, they're moving to Atlanta and Tampa, so that'll be interesting.
There are 2 other open, unoccupied stadiums. One of them's in Athens, one of them's in Gainesville. I'm sure those stadiums would be happy to welcome a bunch of rivalry fans to town.
Do home for 2 years. It's 2 years. And then if you don't like it, you can go back to Jacksonville.
Seriously, what are we doing? What are we doing? To get to the actual game, Georgia's 16.5-point favorites here. Georgia's off a bye. I don't did Florida play last week?
Florida was on a bye as well, I believe.
Okay. Well, that's good. I'm going to take Florida plus the 16.5. In my notes, it says, "Hey Georgia, let's do something on offense." They are +0 in the turnover margin. They're net neutral in the turnover margin because Carson Beck keeps throwing it to the wrong guys. What am I supposed to look at on Georgia's offense and go, yeah, they can win this game by 17 comfortably? Like, prove it to me first.
The Carson Beck interception, like, just epidemic is fascinating to me. I have no idea where that came from because coming into this year, I looked it up. He's now thrown as many interceptions this year as he had in his entire Georgia career up to this point. So going into the year. So I don't know where that's coming from. I don't know if it's just a mental thing at this point or if he's just playing better defenses on average, whatever it is. It's really a problem if Georgia's going to reach the ceiling that they want to reach. However, I'm taking Georgia to cover this game. Florida's been playing a lot better. This could certainly be Billy Napier's last stand, maybe not to win, but just to cover and play a close game here. But Georgia in the last 3 years has absolutely used this as a net crack game. They've won this game on average by 24 points over the last 3 years. Hopefully they figured something out on offense. They need that offense to reach another gear if they're going to reach the goals that they want, if they want to win the SEC, if they want to win the national title, like I know they do. Would love, if I'm a Georgia fan, to just see Carson Beck play a clean game. No turnovers, hit the open receivers, punch in some drives for touchdowns instead of field goals. Do what you should have done against Texas to bury them more quickly than instead of just letting them hang around and make it a close game in the second half.
I really want to see, number one, if they overcome the Mike Bobo effect through the bye week. Maybe they cooked up something special. I think that's what Carson Beck may look back at this season and go, I wish I had my old guy.
Is that what his NFL interviews are going to be like when the GMs are like, hey, man, why'd you throw 12, 15 interceptions, whatever it ends up being? Well, you see, sir. Who's your offensive coordinator, sir? Oh, it's not Mike Bobo?
We're fine.
I promise I will not throw that many interceptions.
Georgia's 95th in total rushing. I did the research on Florida's defense, and they don't do any one thing particularly well. I mean, this team in general doesn't really do any one thing particularly well, but they did play really good football on the road, hostile environment against Tennessee. They kept it close. I don't know. It seems like the guys are playing a little bit for Billy Napier. They're off a bye as well. This doesn't feel like the same Georgia team from the last 3 years that was able to just abuse the Gators up and down the field. So, maybe it's stupid optimism. Maybe it's reckless on my part, but I'll take the Gators plus the 16. Let's just see an entertaining game. That's what a rivalry game is supposed to be, right?
Yeah. It's been a slightly lighter schedule for Florida, the Tennessee game notwithstanding, but
sure.
You're right. They have been playing a lot better. We talked about it on the Monday show this week. And I think they have a chance to knock off a couple of these big teams down the stretch.
Yeah. Last two games a note in the SEC, we can move pretty quickly. Number 19, Ole Miss, 7-point favorites at Arkansas. I do think Ole Miss needs to tread lightly. It's felt like they've been a tad off all season long. I know they pulled away in the second half from Oklahoma, but the offense really looked lost. Trey Harris is still questionable. Didn't get to play against the Sooners last week. It feels like Jackson Dart, when he doesn't have his top wide receiver, it's a little bit more hesitant, some more questions on offense than I think what we're used to. That being said, though, their defensive front stops the run like nobody else in the country. Arkansas's offense, to me, needs to be able to run in order to set up the pass. Taylon Green, when he's asked to do it all from the pocket, hasn't necessarily looked all that good. So I'm going to take Ole Miss very cautiously to cover the spread on the road.
I'll go the other way. This is by far, I think, the best offense Ole Miss has played so far this year. I think if they stumble or if they struggle to get their footing, especially on the road, like they have a couple of these games at home recently, the Kentucky game, the Oklahoma game especially, they struggle to get their footing offensively. They're not going to be able to pull out a win on the road against Arkansas. Just pulled up the availability report. It looks like, Jaquindon Jackson is he out for the season? I might have missed that, but he's out for this game at the very least.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
He's out. He's already listed as out for this game, but the freshman Braylon Russell last week, 175 yards on the ground in relief of Jaquindon Jackson at Mississippi State. So I don't think that running game, at least from an Arkansas perspective, is going to take too big of a step back. And I don't know. I think this is the best offense that Ole Miss has played so far. So I get 7 points at home. I'm going to take the Hogs.
I did it to Tennessee, so it's certainly possible. Speaking of Tennessee, they're 16.5-point favorites against Kentucky. It's still strange to see a top 10 number next to Tennessee's name because, boy, they feel like one of these things is not like the rest when you line top 10 teams up. And again, nobody's really elite in college football this year. At least it doesn't feel like it on a week-to-week basis. But Trey, when I read you these four numbers, I want you to tell me how many of these likely would cover the spread against Kentucky. 25, 14, 23, 24. That's
spread 16.5.
Yeah.
I think 3 of those 4 cover the spread with what Kentucky's been doing on offense lately. I don't know if you caught any of their game against Auburn last week, but they let the Auburn Tigers beat them by 2 touchdowns at home.
I did see that final score. I don't know what's going on with Kentucky. I'll say this. You're either picking Tennessee to get right, or you're picking Kentucky to just have the pendulum swing back from this extreme where they've had some okay offensive showings. The defense has been left out to dry so many times this season. But those are the numbers that I read: 25-14, 23-24. That's what Tennessee scored on offense in an entire game when they're playing legitimate defenses. I just think Kentucky's defense is better than average. And I don't know. Maybe this is reckless on my part, betting in favor of Kentucky, but I'll take the points.
I'm going to take Tennessee minus the 16.5. I just don't know what you can point to with Kentucky offensively to have confidence that they're going to move the ball consistently against that Tennessee defensive front, especially.
Sure.
They don't have the quarterback or the receivers to exploit Tennessee's defensive back struggles.
Sure.
There's a legit chance they could get shut out at home. This one's in Lexington, right?
I think
it's in Knoxville.
Yeah,
there's a legitimate chance they could get shut out in Knoxville, especially. Kentucky's staring 4-8 right in the face to me. They're 3-5 right now, and they close with their with Tennessee, Texas, and Louisville. They get one more bye win against Murray State, but man, I'm super thankful Mark Stoops is still in Lexington.
Oh, no kidding. I wonder what the halftime score of this game will be, because neither offense has been particularly adept at getting off the schneid early in this game. We might have a Frank Beamer situation maybe at the half. Get ready for a whole lot of hands over head memes maybe at the break. All right, let's go to the Big Ten. A couple games to talk about quickly here. We've got number 24 Illinois versus Minnesota. We've got number 13 Indiana at Michigan State. Iowa hosts Wisconsin in a game that's predicted to be really close. The Hawks are just 3-point favorites. And then you've got USC, 2.5-point favorites on the road at Washington. Maybe we save USC and Washington for last, because there was a nugget that I found when I was prepping for this. Of those first 3 games, though, is there any one that kind of catches your eye?
The fact that Minnesota is a 3-point favorite is really interesting against Illinois. I feel like Illinois definitely left a lot to be desired in their trip out to Eugene, Oregon last week, but Minnesota's quietly put their season back on track. They started really rough. They lost to North Carolina on opening night, stubbed their toe a couple more times, but I think they're back to 5-3 if my memory serves.
Correct.
So Minnesota at home, 3-point favorite against Illinois. That's classic Big Ten West game. Not expecting a ton of points, but I cautiously like Minnesota there. It's a weird line. I'm going to steer into it.
It is a weird line. There's no doubt. Minnesota has won their last 3. They beat USC in that crazy game late at night at home. They went on the road and beat UCLA. Come from behind effort to beat the Bruins on the road, but they got it done. And then they kind of manhandled Maryland a little bit in their last contest. I think you're right. I think steering into this line is probably the financially responsible way to go in this, but it also to me feels like an overreaction to holy crap, Minnesota scored 48 points last week. Max Brosmer slinging the rock. And it also feels like an overreaction to Illinois losing on the road at the best team in the country, right? Like Luke Altmaier threw a couple of interceptions. That has been so uncharacteristic for him this season. He looked a lot like 2023 Luke Altmaier, not this current iteration of him. So maybe stupidly again for the third straight pick, I'm going to take Illinois plus the points. My football brain doesn't want to accept Minnesota winning it. Now, I will say the Gophers are good at running the football, and Illinois is not particularly adept at stopping it. So I think the Illini honestly need this to be a little bit more of a shootout than they do a defensive struggle. If it is hard to score points, I think you're right. I think the Gophers might win this one. Speaking of hard to score points, I really am looking at that Iowa-Wisconsin game. It'll be fun to watch a little bit of that game, and I think that game's at night. Is it not? What window are they in? They are. Yeah, they're a night game.
Night
so
game.
We'll be preoccupied during that, but I'll go back and watch it on Sunday afternoon or something like that. The Hawks have actually given up fewer points in conference play so far. Or Wisconsin has given up fewer points. Yeah. Than Iowa has. I will say, though, Iowa has the much better rushing defense. And in a match where these two teams primarily would like to get their yardage by running the football, I'm going to take the home team. I'm going to take the rushing attack and Caleb Johnson. I'll go with the Hawks minus the 3.
I think this is a Caleb Johnson game. I think they can lean on him against Wisconsin's rush defense. Iowa at home typically plays better anyways. So, yeah, I'm with you on that one. Give me the Hawks minus 3.
Indiana is minus 8 at Michigan State. Sparty has give you the number. Is that what you said?
No, it's a big number.
It is a big number. Yeah. State has the 28th best passing defense, and they're not giving up that much on the ground, just 129 yards a game. Curtis Rourke should be back for this one. So you say it's a big number. You taking Sparty to cover at home?
No. It feels like a big number, and I don't like 8 as just a concept in spreads. But if Curtis Rourke is back, I think that offense can find another gear and get it done even on the road. Sparty's look better, though. Like, don't sleep on Michigan State to play a spoiler here, especially if Indiana's riding high from having game day in town last week, a big emotional win over Nebraska the week before that. Definitely some letdown potential with Michigan and Ohio State looming.
I think Sparty's slowly headed in the right direction. I didn't like the brawl that broke out against Michigan last week, but Jonathan Smith does seem to be putting one foot in front of the other in East Lansing. I think that's a great sign for Michigan State. Last game, I mentioned we wanted to hold this till the end. Now, Trey, in April, I believe, you made a prophetic statement that USC would miss a bowl game in the year of our Lord 2024. If they lose in Seattle at Washington, they will be 4-5 and trade their last 3 after a bye week. Will be home against Nebraska, at UCLA in a rivalry game, which they have not always won, and then home against Notre Dame. USC might legitimately miss a bowl game this season.
Yeah, they legitimately. I don't know why you're surprised, Mitch. I usually say things and they usually come to be true, right? Don't look at my Nebraska thought I'm potentially making the playoff this year. But I'm pulling up the Winsipedia page because I'm curious the last time that USC went to Seattle and won. It looks like it was 2016. And they didn't play every year in the Pac-12. They were in different divisions, but they have not won in Seattle since 2016. Before that, you have to go all the way back to, 2012, it looks like. So not an easy place to play. Washington, a plucky team this year that can do just enough to hurt you. USC, what have they done other than, I know they looked like they got right against Rutgers last week. Not a lot of people saw that game because it was on at like 3 a.m. But I lean Washington at home in this one. I feel like they can do just enough to make your life miserable. And USC hasn't really shown that they can beat a team that's competent in multiple ways.
USC is the 16th best passing attack. Do you know who's sitting at number 1 in pass defense?
Is it the Washington Huskies?
It is the Washington Huskies. Purple rain, baby. Let's go, Washington. Cover the number. Let's get USC to Cancun a little bit early this season, shall we? Let's go to the ACC. We've got number 5, Miami, 20-point favorites against Duke. How on earth is the number that high?
Well, we did a deep dive on Duke on Monday night, just kind of investigating where they're at. So go back and listen to that on the Blue Devils if you want a little bit more on this. But the short of it is Duke ain't played nobody, Paul. They and who they have played closely hasn't been an offense, obviously, the caliber of Miami. You mentioned in the show doc they're plus 12 in turnover margin. They can thank the SMU Mustangs in large part for that.
Yes, they can.
And I saw, and the reason I bring that up is because I saw that stat too. I was looking for anything. Why is Duke 6-2 or whatever they are? And I saw the turnover margin. I was like, there it is. And then I remembered that they just played SMU and were plus 6 in that one game. But they can ugly up a game. They have a very solid defense. They don't give up a lot of points. They give up a few more yards than they'd probably like. But once they get in the red zone and on their side of the field, they really tighten up. So Miami's got to execute in the red zone if they want to win this one going away. I think they can out-talent Duke relatively easily, but the Manny Diaz effect is also there, is it not? With the big revenge narrative, this might be the revenge game of the century in his mind.
I'm with you. I feel like the Dukies are rallying around their head coach. They've rallied around the culture that he's instilled there. I'll take Duke plus 20 just because it feels like an offensively high number. And I get it. The turnover margin, I knew where 6 of those turnovers came from when I put that note in the show doc. But you know what?
Even plus 6 is solid.
They force those turnovers. Yeah, I mean, they earn those turnovers. You mentioned the red zone conversions. Miami's 18th in the country in scoring percentage. They score just about 93% of the time when they enter the red zone. 75% touchdown conversion, though, which is, I lost my search function, which is 10th in the country. So they are one of the best at paying it off once they get inside the 20. You picked Michigan off vibes earlier. I'm going to pick Duke off vibes.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
We're probably headed to Clemson and Miami in the ACC championship game, even though Pitt and SMU are doing their best to woo us. But until we get there, let's keep having some fun in the ACC, shall we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of title contenders, Louisville goes on the road to at least my favorite to get to the ACC championship and win it. Number 11, Clemson. Y'all gave Clemson a shout out on the Monday episode as well. They're 10.5-point favorites against the Cardinals. Trey, did you know since that loss to Georgia, where we all wrote them off and we all canceled Cade Klubnik and said, pack it up, Dabo Swinney has no idea what he's doing. The Clemson offense has figured it out. They've only failed to score 40+ once in their 6-game winning streak. That was 29 on the road at Florida State. The Cards are giving up 25 points a game. It feels like another one where Clemson kind of gets to name their score.
It does. And Clemson definitely has been taking care of business. They've not exactly been playing a murderer's row schedule since the Georgia game. But I think this is another game that they can really make a statement against Louisville. You mentioned the defense for Louisville. They also struggle with just giving up big plays in general. You go back to that Miami game, it was big play after big play after big play. So I think Cade Klubnik is going to get another opportunity to pad some stats here.
Yeah. Last game in the ACC that I put on our sheet, Virginia Tech, 4-point favorites at Syracuse. Kyle McCord is bouncing off of a career low, 5 interceptions thrown, 3 of them were for pick sixes. Virginia Tech just kind of keeps winning after a really inauspicious start. Does Bashal Tootin, Kyron Drones keep it going in a very weird place to play?
I'm going to take Syracuse in the points here. I think at home, Syracuse has kind of been a different animal this year, the Stanford game notwithstanding. But
that loss is aged like milk.
Yes. I still don't know how they lost that game. I think the post-game win probability for Stanford was also like sub 10%, if I'm remembering right. But Syracuse and Kyle McCord especially have been a different animal at home. Their offense really seems to click there. Virginia Tech has done well against their schedule, but I still think they're a product of their schedule even at this point in the season. So I'm going to take Syracuse at home.
Okay, I'm riding with the Cuse as well. The Wireless Dome, different place to play. So let's believe in Kyle McCord. Let's believe in that offense to bounce back. Big 12, final conference to go through here in depth. 3 games that caught our eye. We've got number 11, Iowa State, 13.5-point favorites against Texas Tech. Baron Morton, who left the game last week in Fort Worth for the Red Raiders with a shoulder injury or a collarbone, one of the two, he's trending towards being able to play. We really liked Will Hammond in relief there in Fort Worth, but unfortunately,
finest, baby.
He went ice cold at the absolute wrong time. We talked about that in the recap show. Iowa State has really put it together. I don't know that they've played certainly the toughest part of their schedule yet. We talked about that in the preseason, right? The back part of their schedule is what will define the Cyclones season, whether or not they're a legitimate playoff team or if they're going to fall by the wayside. But this seems like maybe a weird opponent to play. Texas Tech can put up 50 in a heartbeat, but they also can't stop anybody.
That's the key for me. I think Baron Morton, if he's healthy, that's great for Tech. That might help them keep this a little bit closer. But Iowa State at home, I think, is going to be able to name their score almost on this Texas Tech defense. I don't know why they haven't really been able to find consistent defensive success. They had a really good pass rush a couple of years ago with the A&M transfer whose name is escaping me right now.
Tyree Wilson.
Yep, Tyree Wilson went really high in the NFL draft, but I don't know why they haven't been able to find defensive consistency, but this year it's bottomed out seemingly. So I'm going to take Iowa State at home. They kind of got a get your attention win against UCF a couple weeks ago, and I think they're going to figure things out.
Yeah, the Clones are a very balanced attack. They can hurt you through the air. Rocco Beck's taking care of the football this year. They also run it fairly well, top 40 in that regard in the nation. Texas Tech's total defense, Trey, the teams below them are Middle Tennessee State, Ball State, Mississippi State, New Mexico, Utah State, Oklahoma State, and Kent State, who is giving up a whopping 541 yards of offense per game. The Red Raiders come in at a golden 127, giving up basically 466 yards of offense on average per game.
It's not great.
The will recruit athletes and teach them how to play football later mentality from Joey McGuire. Not
working on offense.
It is working on offense.
They got half of it figured out.
It turns out not knowing how to tackle and run cover 3 before getting to Lubbock might be an issue that they need to fix in the recruiting ranks.
And it's so weird. I don't know, has the game just passed Tim DeRuyter by?
Dude, I don't know.
Because he's a theoretically really solid defensive coordinator. He's had some really solid defenses in his years. I know he's up there in years at this point in his career, but he's not a guy that you look at like a Ted Roof at UCF where you're like, oh, why did you hire that guy? That's obviously going to fail.
No, we were excited when DeRuyter got hired in Lubbock. I mean, he had successful years at Texas A&M and Oregon.
Air Force,
yeah, he certainly has some skins on the wall, but it's not worked in Lubbock. And I don't know, again, if that's the product of the scheme of the athletes, but boy, for all the hullabaloo that we want to make about Texas Tech, and I'm a Red Raider fan. I want to believe in Texas Tech. I think they're a fun brand of football when they're going well. My gosh, I mean, just get off the field once on third down, right? I mean, don't give up a 75-yard pass play for a touchdown with 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter when you're up multiple scores. Like, let's do the basic things right until they start doing that. I'm gonna take the number. So let's go Clones. 17th ranked Kansas State. Apologies to Wildcat fans.
That's an odd NCAA college football file you got there. If Kent State is ranked that high.
Yeah, every man a Wildcat. Not in Kent, Ohio. Kansas State's on the road at Houston. They're 13.5-point favorites. The over-under here caught my eye because it's 45.5. So with that spread, it kind of feels like, given Houston's recent trend offensively, they're expecting Kansas State to score all the points. I know Houston has had some glimpses of being a little bit better, and I certainly hope that they're headed that way. You talked about in our preseason preview that it's going to take time for the Cougars to rebuild everything. It is a to the studs approach. Deion Chris was having some moments, some glimpses offensively at quarterback. He's turned the ball over a couple of times as well. I'll be honest, I don't even know who the starter is this week for Houston at quarterback, but I do feel pretty good about going with the Wildcats here, even on the road.
Yeah, I'm with you on taking the Wildcats. Just to highlight Houston's offensive struggles this year, our friends over at Stats of War and the College Football Insiders, they put out it was the percentage of successful offensive possessions this year. Houston was 133rd out of 134 in percent successful offensive possession. So I think Kansas State defensively is going to have a great day. Offensively, they've really started clicking lately. Avery Johnson looks like he's rounding into form. This should be a good little net crack game for him. Yeah,
probably only ahead of our friends in Kent, Ohio, there offensively. Baylor.
Actually, yes. Yeah, that
Yeah.
actually was true.
Hey, there we go.
Full circle segment. Look at
There
that.
we go. I found a way. I found a way to get there. Baylor and TCU. Dave Aranda tried sneaky close to making a bowl game. We did not think that beating Oklahoma State was on the table. I didn't really think that beating Texas Tech was on the table, but lo and behold, the Bears are doing it. They're scoring points offensively. The defense, it's hit or miss at times, but Aranda and the boys are 4-4 in Waco. And let's be honest. Do we really know who TCU is? Like, this feels like a winnable game for BYU, even though TCU may be starting to get the offense back on track.
I like the Freudian slip with accidentally calling Baylor BYU.
My
But that's okay. Freudian slips happen. Yeah, I have no idea who TCU is at this point. Are they the team that looked competent offensively against Texas Tech last week and struggled defensively? Or are they the team that showed up against Houston and Utah in back-to-back games and could barely score? Who's to say? Sawyer Robinson looks really good in relief at Baylor. That's been a really awesome bright spot for them. I'm inclined to take Baylor at home. I don't really have a reason to pick TCU right now.
Yeah, I just feel like if we knew what TCU's identity was, and maybe it's slinging it through the air, maybe it's relying on Josh Hoover to get the ball out.
But defensively, I don't think they can stop Baylor, which is a weird sentence to say with where I thought both of these teams would be.
I think you're right. I don't think you can argue that at all. I mean, TCU is going to score, and given what Baylor has put on the field, that's honestly okay because their offense has found another gear this season. They found a way. Shocker. Once they got rid of Jeff Grimes, suddenly everything works on offense. I mean, huge addition by subtraction.
And defensively for TCU, just to illustrate the struggle, the only time they have given up less than 27 points this year is when they played Utah a couple weeks ago with whatever situation Utah was running out there. It's not been pretty other than playing Long Island. I'm not counting the Long Island game, guys. Sorry. Yes, you shut out Long Island. But other than that, it's been at least 27 points. And I think Baylor is capable of scoring more than 27 on this defense.
I'm with you. We've agreed quite a bit on this show. Again,
it's going to be scary. It's going to be apocalyptic for our picks, so we apologize in advance. We need Derek coming in here to save the graphics. He needs to come back.
I know, right? For those of you who maybe have joined us here in year 3, you're new to the show. The first 2 years, basically, if Trey and I picked on the same side of something, like we were wrong a scary amount of the time. So
it was very reliable to fade that. If we ever
it absolutely was. So if you're bored, if you follow us and your board's all red at the end of the weekend, at least we warned you, right? That's it for the Power 4 conferences. It's kind of a light week in the G5. Louisiana beat Texas State on a Tuesday night. Good win for the Raging Cajuns, who are now in the driver's seat in the Sun Belt West. Other than that, though, Army's going to take on your boys over at Air Force. I went back today at work. I was going back through some of our old episodes from this preseason, and I listened to our Darlings episode, and knowing what I knew now about Air Force, and then getting to the point where you gave the historical stats about, hey, listen, Troy Calhoun just doesn't hit under on their win totals. Like, he's always overachieved. It truly was a little bit of a chuckle moment. Now, to bring it also back on me, I picked Maryland as my darling this year, and that has gone sideways in a hurry. It's Mike Loxley. I should have known what we were in for, but all of that to set up the fact that Army's 22-point favorites at the Chair Force this weekend.
Yeah, and I think that they're going to be able to name their rushing yard total. Obviously, we always say it when service academies play each other, don't bet any spreads or anything like that. Just stay away. But I think Army is going to continue to be very successful. I'm really looking forward to what they can do against Notre Dame. I think they're a little bit more complete version of Navy, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So I have that one circled just to see what happens. I would be rooting so hard for a seismic upset there.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little bit more optimistic before the Navy game than Notre Dame.
Defense was not built to stay in that Notre Dame game, though.
Yeah.
I didn't want to crash the vibe party on the preview show last week, but Navy's defense did not stand a chance in doing anything competitive in that game.
Yeah. Well, and Navy turning the football over multiple times, just fumbling
6
it
times,
away.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that certainly kicks things sideways early in that game. Yeah, so a little bit less optimistic about Army maybe doing something special, but listen, Bryson Daly we trust, and that defense has been very solid. I think they whoop up on our Air Force this weekend.
It's not G5, but I'm still on Wazoo playoff watch, Mitch. I'm still on Wazoo 11-1 watch. They host Utah State this week. The Aggies are not a very good team, so it should be another opportunity to get a big win. Pulling up the all-state, the all-knowing all-state playoff predictor right now, just to see where we're at with the Cougs. Let's just do this live here. We got a live 10% chance. I like it. That's good enough for me.
It's not nothing.
It's not nothing, but if we win out, our current position is 22%. That's down like 40% from a couple weeks ago. But if we win out, we got a 22% shot. I'll take it.
Well, I think it's all of these teams like BYU and Indiana that are and Texas A&M, quite frankly, that have snuck up where it feels like it definitely feels like there's a human behind the all-state playoff predictor, because those numbers change so wildly on a week-to-week basis. And I know it's all math and formula based, but it does feel awfully reactionary compared to, I don't know, some of the other statistical models, the SP plus, stuff like that.
This is one of the 22% that has them in the bracket, though, because they also simulate the bracket down at the bottom, and it has them making it all the way to the Final Four before they lose to Texas. So how great would that be?
Sure. Let's make that happen. Jake Dickert, man, coach of the year, taking Wazoo.
And shout out to him for staying. Shout out to him for staying. Like, I just can't say that enough. I know, like, Jonathan Smith, nothing against you. I totally get why he made the decision that he did to go to Michigan State. Totally get it. But shout out to Jake Dickert for sticking out and trying to build something at Washington State.
I love it. Now he's trying to build a conference around his team. So
steps.
Hey, next year they can be an automatic qualifier. We'll see if that works out. All right, let's get out of here on that. Week 10 preview in the books. Again, subscribe, follow the channel, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you get your college football content. We're thrilled to talk ball with you. We'd love to have you be a part of the Jimmies and the Joes. And we'll see you again on the live show Saturday night. That should be a fun one. Again, a lot of good games early. Feels like a thinner slate in the evening. So we'll probably be live following the Texas A&M South Carolina game that we'll be heavily invested in, probably sweating bullets through. But yeah, another fun slate on deck. I'm excited to get to the end of it. And now it seems like going forward for the 3 Tech Takeout show on Monday night, now we can really start to look forward to and build that playoff bracket. I think we get playoff rankings this following Tuesday night on election night. So, just a couple of things happening, but now we're really going to start to figure out how the committee views head-to-head wins, strength of schedule, et cetera. It's an exciting time to be a college football fan.
Yeah, I can't wait for next week. I know that's what I'm going to be glued into and hopefully using it as like a good distraction for a little bit on Tuesday night.
Yeah.
That's probably what our Monday show is going to work into. A lot of playoff talk, a lot of bracketology, a lot of just breaking down what the biggest matchups are from the past week and dissecting the fallout of that. So I'm really excited to get into that now that we're in November.
Yeah. Aaron Judge just dropped a ball in center field, so that means it's time to go watch World Series baseball. For Trey Reeves, I'm Mitch Mason. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. Until next time, so long, everybody.
Gracious him. How about